My name is Susan Holtzman. I am the president and CEO of NAMI Miami-Dade County. I am here with two members of our team, Sophia Jimenez and Eileen. And Eileen, suddenly your last name is escaping.
Pestana.
Pestana, who are on our outreach and communications team. So I want to thank you guys both for being here and for all the great work that you do for NAMI. And just a couple of little housekeeping things. So we are going to have this great presentation. And then after the presentation, we are going to take questions and I'll be moderating those questions. So we do want to remind everyone to please mute your microphones so we don't get interrupted by any background noise. And then we'll give you a little reminder that the NAMI Walk for Mental Health Awareness is on May 10th. Later on, we'll be giving you information on how to sign up for a team for that walk if you haven't done that already, and some of the other programs and services that we offer from NAMI. So I'm going to go ahead and do our introduction. And I'm really excited to be introducing Dr. Rachna Buxani-Mirpuri. Dr. Buxani-Mirpuri is a licensed mental health counselor in Florida and a national certified mental health counselor. She is the founder of Buxani Care here in Miami. And prior to that, she had an established career in the Cayman Islands and Dubai. Dr. Buxani is a certified narcissistic abuse treatment clinician, NATC. This certification reflects that her specialized focus on helping individuals recover from narcissistic abuse through trauma-informed care and personalized strategies aimed at rebuilding self-worth and resilience. And finally, we want to be sure to mention that Dr. Buxani serves as a volunteer board member for NAMI Miami-Dade County, and we are so grateful for all of the input that she provides us. So Dr. Buxani, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for that. And thank you for allowing this really important topic to be discussed. Over the years, I don't know if it's that I've seen an increase, but I think people are more confused and people are talking so much more about narcissism that this was long overdue. So I'm glad we're doing this. Let's talk narcissism. Okay, so what is narcissism? According to the DSM, and we'll get to the DSM symptoms, and for those of you who don't know what the DSM is, it's the holy grail of what we mental health therapists follow in terms of diagnosing people with mental illnesses. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And according to the DSM, again, we'll go over the symptoms, but it's a person who has an exaggerated sense of self, right? So, and a very inhibited ability to self-reflect. So a person who needs, who thinks they're important, who believes they're important, who desires that from everybody, who desires that sort of treatment from everybody around them, and has very little ability to actually self-reflect. The other thing is the lack of empathy. And that's tricky because we're going to actually talk about, because it's not all kinds of empathy that a narcissist is actually devoid of. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of empathy and what is lacking in the narcissist. Perfect. So now let's discuss as far as the DSM symptoms are concerned. And I keep specifying DSM symptoms, and there's a reason for that. But let's look at that. All right. So these are, according to the DSM, these are the key symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder. What makes something a disorder? These symptoms have to be present across different areas of life and have to be present over time, right? So these are the two fundamentals that have to be present. So people need to have a grandiose sense of self. They have to have a belief in superiority, a need for admiration, and seeking out that attention, an inflated sense of entitlement. And entitlement, as research has found, is probably one of the key traits of narcissists, right? So, and here we have the lack of empathy again, frequent envy and arrogance. some of these terms are easily understandable. Let's deal with the terms that are a little more challenging, or terms that I feel need to be explained a little further. Let's talk about entitlement and why that is so very important. And let's talk about what's missing in the DSM criteria of what we see in narcissists, right? The sense of entitlement. So a person with a healthy self-esteem is going to think of themselves and say, you know what, I'm good, right? A narcissist believes I am better than others, and thus I deserve to be treated as such. I deserve to be treated specially, and I'm unique, I'm special. Everybody around me needs to bow down. So that's the sense of entitlement. I can never be wrong. If something goes wrong, it's somebody else's fault, right? So that's their sense of entitlement. Empathy. Let's talk about the different kinds of empathy, because that's often where people get confused. Because, a lot of my caseload is made of victims of narcissistic abuse. And when they first come to me, they say, but you know what? But he has empathy, because, when he looks, or if something happens, in the community or outside or with the kids, he's able to, empathize. So let's talk about what that is and why is that not genuine empathy, right? So we have three kinds of empathy. One, cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is actually the ability to think and know when I need to feel bad, right? So if somebody is going through something, if I see a homeless person, I know that, that's a tough situation. I probably should feel bad about that. So that's our cognitive empathy. It's our thinking empathy. The next level as we progress is the emotional empathy. That is actually me feeling for another person, right? So somebody is going through something, I actually genuinely feel for that person. And the highest form of empathy is compassionate empathy. That goes beyond that. I think I should feel a certain way. I actually do feel a certain way, but now I want to go out and help this person. I actually want to turn that empathy into action. And that's compassionate empathy. So narcissists actually do have cognitive empathy. What they lack is the emotional and compassionate empathy. So that's why when their mask is on, and we'll talk about the mask, but when their mask is on and when they're trying to project, they know when to feel bad. So they can actually turn that piece on. Do they actually feel it? Not really, right? So that's what we need to understand as far as narcissism and empathy is concerned. The other part, and like I said, after the DSM, or in conjunction with the DSM, we also have the trait models of narcissism. And they talk a little bit more, they go a little bit more in depth. And one of the key factors we found, that is a part of the NPD or narcissism, is antagonistic personalities, right? So these people are extremely antagonistic. What does that include? They are manipulative, they're deceitful, they, again, that sense of entitlement, so, and as we go on and we discuss the different kinds of narcissists, you'll understand also the levels of antagonism that we see in different kinds of narcissists. So, but every narcissist has a level of antagonism in them. They have no issues using somebody for their own benefit. They can manipulate people into believing and doing for them whatever they need. So those are some of the things that are not in the DSM, along with obviously the types of narcissism, which we're going to actually get into today and we're going to discuss. Let's talk about statistics. All right. NPD, actually the 0.5 to 6.2%. That's actually by the American Psychiatric Association. Now, here's the problem. We don't have a lot of research. Most of the research has actually been done in community settings. And it's not accurate because most people with narcissism actually don't come into therapy. So what we have found is personality disorders in general, so not only NPD, but personality disorders in general, in primary care are about 25%. In outpatient psychiatric care, it's 50%. So 50% of the people that come into outpatient psychiatric care are actually have not NPD, but personality disorders. And now we are actually in the DSM or in the new ICD codes that are coming up, we're actually moving away from NPD, borderline, antisocial. We're actually looking at personality in a continuum. So that's why the statistics that I'm trying to give you more so right now are about personality disorders in general. And in the criminal justice system, it's actually 2/3. And that's why it's a public health issue. We see personality disorders and a lot of narcissistic personality disorders linked with domestic abuse, aggression, violence, crime. And that's why this is something that we really do need to understand, we do need to take seriously. And also, I tend to think about narcissism like an octopus, right? So it's like one person, but it affecting so many lives around them. And those are the people that actually show up in therapy because they need help trying to deal with the person in their life without really having an understanding of what's going on. So that's why this topic's so very important for us to understand, so that we can encourage people around us who may be in relationships with narcissists to actually get help. Because again, there is that aggressive element to this. All right, let's talk about the types. The grandiose we talked about, right? So the DSM actually only talks about the grandiose. And that's, I think, where the misconception comes from. Because when we think about narcissism, we really do just think about that person who's constantly bragging about themselves, who's attention seeking, who's charming, and who's so charismatic. And extrovert, oh my gosh, the life of the party. And yes, that's one kind of narcissist, but there are other kinds too. And in fact, what we have seen more and more is the second, the vulnerable, which we'll talk about. But every grandiose narcissist also has a component of vulnerable in them. And that shows up when they face a challenge. So if something is going really bad in the grandiose narcissist's life, they will shift over to the vulnerable, right? And let's talk about what the vulnerable is for you to be able to understand a little bit more about that flip that happens between the grandiose and narcissist. Now, there can be only vulnerable narcissists. So somebody can be just a vulnerable narcissist, somebody can be just a grandiose, but the grandiose will have vulnerable qualities within them once they are faced with a challenging situation. Let's talk about vulnerable narcissists. So they have all the characteristics of the grandiose, right, within themselves. Okay, so outside their overt presentation is more of a shy, and I would actually call it socially anxious, not shy, but they are socially anxious people, very, very non-trusting. They almost walk around with this idea that everybody's out there to get me, feel a lot of contempt towards most people. A lot of negative mood states are attached with the vulnerable narcissist. So we see depression, we see anxiety, and we actually see them in therapy because they actually come in because of these negative mood states. But sure enough, because they've got that underlying, characteristics of that arrogance, of the entitlement, the victim mentality, woe is me, so what they do is once whatever issue has been dealt with, you see the other side come up, right? So, but this is the kind of narcissist that we will see associated with more of the negative mood disorders. Another thing that's associated with the vulnerable narcissist is a failure to launch, right? So I can't get a job. right? Not that I can't, I don't try enough. I don't try hard enough to get a job, but then I blame the world for it, right? So it is failure to launch, but then the result of that is the woe is me, that, you know what, I would have been a great writer if people around me just noticed how good I was, right? So it's everybody else's fault. And these people in relationships tend to be extremely passive aggressive. So, um, again, an example of that is that, because they walk around not trusting, so that not that distrust or the mistrust also is in their personal relationships, and they really don't want to be. So any little thing that they sense that you are doing can throw them off, and very, very passive aggressive, the silent treatment, which is devastating for most people. So all of those qualities. I have I have little narrations of it, but I'm mindful of the time. And if I have time later on, I'll actually give you a whole picture of what that looks like in somebody. Let's move on, and let's talk about the malignant. Probably the most difficult and challenging of the narcissists that we have over there is a malignant narcissist. It's their vicious, destructive, and highly, highly antagonistic, and they sadistic and Machiavellian. So, and Machiavellianism, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, is a person who's ready to use anyone for their gain without any consideration of how it's affecting the other person, right? So I am completely fine using another person for my gain. I am completely fine objectifying a person. Dangerous, also in relationships. These are the ones that have the coercive control. We see a lot of, in relationships where a person is monitoring where you're going. So whether it's financial control, whether who are you talking to? I'm going to put cameras in the house. What did you talk to your mom about? Why are you going out with your friends, right? So that's the malignant narcissist. Really dangerous, really scary. Some of the features, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the relationship cycle, things like gaslighting, and we'll talk about gaslighting because that's the buzzword. And I'll explain it further when we do the relationship cycle. But really, really, I have horrifying stories of people who've been in malignant relationships, and it's devastating because every inch of their life is controlled by the person, and sometimes they don't even know it because it's the idea of that the trauma bonding where you are it's good and it's bad and it's good and it's bad, and that's why people stay in those relationships. But it's also the idea of, okay, I trust this person. Why would this person, he's looking out for me or she's looking out for me, that's why they're doing this, because they're extremely manipulative and extremely deceitful. The communal narcissist. This term was actually coined in Germany about 15 years back. And they obviously are motivated by everything that the narcissist is motivated by, but they get it by helping others, right? So they will go out, do these grand gestures of charity, but the caveat is if they don't receive validation, appreciation, attention for that, for their charitable good deeds, they get extremely angry. So the only reason they do it is because they're driven by everything, that sense of entitlement. They want the attention, they want all of that. And their way of getting it is, I'm going to do charitable things and I'm going to help people out. And that's how I'm going to get it. But if I don't get it, then comes out that really rageful narcissist. The neglectful, really, there's not much to say about this person. He or she is not even aware of the existence of somebody else. People are just objects. There is no feeling or desire to be in a relationship with someone or to be aware of somebody else's needs. This is all about them. Everybody is like a personal assistant or helper to them, fulfill what they want to. Everybody is there to pay attention to their needs. They are never going to be attentive to somebody else's needs. So that's your neglectful. And the self-righteous. This is an interesting one. Self-righteous narcissists are so they are rigid to almost a fault, right? So think about this situation. There's a dinner party you have to go to. You have a small baby, and you're running late. That is unacceptable. No matter what the situation is, you have to follow the rules. You have to, very, very perfectionist to a standard that's unachievable, unattainable, right? So, and they're very punitive. If you are not doing something that, according to the standards that they have set, they can be extremely, extremely punitive. So, while you look at that person initially and say, oh, you know what, that's great. Like, they have very high morals. All right. And then there is no wiggle room to those morals, right? And it's almost, and it doesn't matter whether those values, so whether their values are in line with your values is irrelevant to them. You have to follow their values, else they get really, really angry. Hope that's explained a little bit about the different kinds of narcissists, a lot of which we don't talk about because, again, what we generally think of narcissists is just the first one, the grandiose. There's actually a nice movie. It's called A Real Pain, and it's about two cousins. One of the cousins is quite a good depiction of the vulnerable narcissist, in case anybody wants to watch that. This is the continuum. So we have, and often people are like, okay, so what's narcissism versus NPD? Remember, NPD is a disorder, right? But that doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't have the disorder is not narcissistic, right? So the disorder means that they have come in, we have assessed them, we have been able to give them a diagnosis, and it has caused social and occupational impairment. So many times that doesn't happen, especially with the grandiose narcissist. I tend to think that our society, to a great extent, actually reinforces some of that behavior, right? Because a lot of grandiose narcissists are actually very successful. So they don't have a need to come to therapy. Again, so that's the distinction between NPD and a narcissist. So you could know somebody who's narcissist, but has not gotten the diagnosis of NPD. That doesn't mean that they are not dangerous. But this is just a continuum of where there's narcissistic traits to then the grandiose vulnerable in the middle, and the malignant is all the way, at the other end of this. And in between are those, the self-righteous and the neglectful and all, the communal narcissists. Right, we'll move along. This is a little bit of the history. I thought it's important to understand this. And the reason I think it's important to understand is to understand how new this is, right? The first time NPD even showed up in the DSM was in 1980. That's not too long ago, right? So until then, we didn't even recognize, which is why even now, there isn't enough research on narcissistic personality disorder. And, slowly but surely, we will get there. And there are researchers that are coming up. But again, a fairly new diagnosis, not fairly new in existence, just when it hit the DSM. Social media, I have so much to say. But is it getting worse? I tend to think so. People are so, I think social media just makes us self-absorbed, and we tend to feel that everybody is so worried about what we are doing in our lives and what restaurant we're eating in, what food we're eating. And so does that add to the narcissistic traits of people? I tend to think so. the good, well, it's good for us as clinicians because the ICD-11 is trying to move away. So we don't need that NPD diagnosis. We can just diagnose people with personality disorders in the continuum, right? So ICD-11 is trying to move away from that to make it non-specific. So not borderline versus narcissism versus antisocial. And in a way, it's better because maybe that will bring in more people because there is a negative connotation to NPD or even borderline. So hopefully that will get more people coming in to get evaluated. It's a little bit about the history. Let's talk about the relationship cycle. The first, and I think the most dangerous, is the idealization or what we call love bombing. That's when it's all roses and peaches. It's lovely. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he did this for me. He calls me so many times a day. He checks on me. He's bringing me gifts all the time, right? So there's that. It's extreme, right? And it feels good because we have the love hormone, the oxytocin is everywhere because it feels really good. This is probably the most important phase to a narcissist because what they are doing at this point is they're kind of indoctrinating you. They're learning about you because they're very curious, things that they will use against you a little later. But it's almost like mesmerizing. So you don't actually know that that's happening. When the idealization, so when the narcissist knows that he has you, and I keep saying he only because according to the research, there's more men I'm using the latest research or the only research that we have. Men are diagnosed more with NPD and that by no means means that there are not enough women that have narcissistic traits or narcissism or NPD even, and that's why I keep saying he. But once that phase is over, and once he knows it, once a narcissist knows that they've got you exactly where they want to, that's when they move to phase number 2. And phase number 2 is the devaluing, right? Probably one of the most difficult phases for people to go through. There is so much of what is happening at that point. The concept of trauma bonding, so where it's, oh my gosh, but it's good, but then it's bad, right? I'm physically abusing you today, but tomorrow I'm getting you flowers and I'm apologizing to you that, oh my gosh, you know what? I don't know what happened to me. And so it's the constant up and down. And that's what keeps people bonded in relationships like that, right? Because you feel like, okay, maybe he's going to change. It's that hope. So it's the constant, I'm going to devalue you, but then I'm going to ask for forgiveness. The love bombing phase is almost like putting you on a pedestal. The devaluing phase is when they take you and throw you down, right? First of all, nobody needs to be on a pedestal. Frankly, that's not how relationships should work. I mean, because you always have a chance of falling from there. But once they put you on that and it's so intoxicating, the devaluing phase is when they take you and throw you out from there. And this is where it drives people crazy. This is the phase that this and the discarding phase is where I see most of the clients come in because they tend to think that there's something wrong with them. How can I make it better? But you know what? But last week it was so good. How do I get it back there? How do I keep it there? Also, there's the dissonance, right? The cognitive dissonance where you're justifying their behavior. No, he, but I know he loves me. He's just had a tough day at work, or I don't know, there's something going on with him, but I know he cares about me so much. So it's almost like a disconnect, a justification of those behaviors because it was so good. And you're thinking, okay, I need to get it back over there. This is also where the famous gaslighting happens, right? And let's talk about gaslighting a little bit. How is it different than lying, right? So what is gaslighting? So let's talk about an example, right? So if one of my clients has seen their partner with somebody else in a restaurant, and she confronts him and she says, you know what? I saw you with X at this place. No, I was not there. What are you talking about? Okay, that's a lie, right? Because he was there and he's lying. Gaslighting takes it to a different level, right? So the person who's gaslighting is going to say, no, I was not there, but what is wrong with you? You seem to be there's something going on with you. You need to have your head checked. You are paranoid. You always think that you're seeing me. When I was right here at home, I'm telling you, you need to be on some meds. There's something not okay. So not only are you, so what gaslighting does is not only are you lying, but you're dismantling the person, right? Because their whole reality, but not only their whole reality, you're also now making them feel that there's something wrong with them that they need to go have fixed. So the devaluing phase is also where the gaslighting we see a lot. And something interesting, but the term gaslighting actually comes from the Gaslight movie in 1940. For those of you who haven't watched it, it's actually about a husband and wife, and the husband is trying to slowly but surely drive his wife crazy by flickering the gas lights in the house. And she actually starts believing that there's something wrong with her until when one of the cops shows up, and then I don't want to spoil the whole movie for you, but ultimately she realizes that it's not her thanks to this cop, but it's a really good watch for those of you who haven't watched it. But that's really where we get this term from. The other things that happen at the devaluing phase are, and we follow the DIMMER acronym. So the dismissiveness, invalidation, minimization, manipulation, which is, again, gaslighting is one of those techniques, rage, and before the rage, entitlement. And like I said, for those of you who really want to watch the movie's name is Gaslight. It's from 1940. It's a really good watch. All right. After the devaluing comes the discard. It is what it is, right? So after the narcissist has devalued a person, that's it. I'm done with you. I don't have any use for you. You're out. You're out of my life. And that's the discard phase. This is the phase where we see a lot more abuse, because the narcissist has no need for you anymore, right? So you're out. They will do whatever it is. So the abusive language, maybe the cheating happens, but you're out of their life. And then comes the hoovering. It's like the vacuum, right? So this is the phase where the narcissist tries to bring you back. Maybe they've gone out there, they've looked, and they've found, maybe they've dated some people, and they're like, okay, no, I think she was okay. they'll come back to you, right? And they'll try to get you back. So that's what we call hoovering. And they'll try to bring you right back to the love bombing phase. So the hoovering is very much like the love bombing, because all of that starts again. So and that's why it's a cycle, because that's how they keep doing it. And that's how they keep you stuck, right? So that's the relationship cycle of narcissism. Let's get a little bit into what do we do if we find ourselves in a narcissistic relationship, or we know somebody else who's in a narcissistic relationship. Let's move on, Eileen, and we'll talk about some of the strategies. These are some of the things I help people with. The first thing is psychoeducation. Have to be careful about that, because a lot of times people are not ready. Remember, they are in relationships, and remember, there's the cognitive dissonance. Remember, there's a trauma bonding. A lot of them come in because they feel that there's something wrong with them, and I need to make this relationship work. So we need to make them aware, but slowly, right? So there's push and pull. I remember this client of mine who came in, and finally they got divorced, but her husband left. So it was already in the discard phase. Thankfully, the hoovering did not happen, but there was the discard phase, and she came in and she said, "But I have to do whatever. I have to fix myself. I have to fix myself." So one of the things that just a gut feeling, just because I've worked with so many people in narcissistic relationships, one of the things I was so sure of was that he was with somebody else, but she refused. For years, she refused to believe. Ultimately, after 2 or 3 years, he sent divorce papers, and that was it. But it was difficult, and it is difficult. These, because you want to believe, you want to have hope that it's going to get better, or that person is going to change, or maybe I can do something to bring this person back. But that's futile in relationships like that. But again, slowly. Work on radical acceptance. What's radical acceptance, and how is acceptance of the situation? Radical acceptance is the acceptance that situation is not going to change. This is how it's going to be. And in spite of that, there are people who choose to be in those relationships, and that's just fine, as long as you know that this is how it's going to be, right? So working on that radical acceptance is extremely important. I love Dr. Ramani's Deep. She has it in one of her books, and it's lovely. So the acronym DEEP is don't defend. So if you find yourself with the narcissist, do not defend yourself, right? Because they need to know that they have the control, and it's okay. You don't need to prove yourself to them. Don't engage. There are tons of techniques like gray rocking, yellow rocking, that teach us how not to engage at an emotional level with a narcissist. Because again, it's, you're going in there with all your emotions. They're just going to take it and use it to their advantage. So, don't engage, don't explain. They don't care. It doesn't matter if you want them to understand your perspective. They're not going to. That's not the role that you play in their life, right? And don't personalize. Again, easier said than done. And especially if you have a narcissist. I mean, today we've talked about when the narcissistic relationship, really in terms of a romantic relationship. Remember, there are people who have narcissistic parents. And this is extremely difficult to do. When you have a parent, it's hard not to personalize, right? So I do understand, and Dr. Ramani, who came up with this approach, also does understand that this is not an easy thing to do, but this is the only way to survive in a narcissistic relationship. And the last thing is surrounding yourself by people who support you. So to be able to deal with a relationship like that, you need your crew. You need people who are there to support you, to understand you, to empower you. until you decide that maybe you want to walk away from that relationship. Let's move on. I want to talk about, I want to give you all some points that we've covered today that I want you all to walk away with. Remember, lack of empathy, right? So what we all need to know about narcissists. So they lack empathy, but remember, they lack the emotional and compassionate empathy. So don't get confused when they are displaying some sort of empathy, because they do have their cognitive empathy, and that's completely intact, right? And that's what allows them to the mask off, because sometimes I'll have people saying, do they know? Like, do they even have control of what they're doing? Yes, they do, right? Because remember, their behavior is not the same with everyone. There are people who will behave, they're completely fine with people outside in the world, but with family members or with their partners is where that mask is off, right? So, and that cognitive empathy allows them to do what they do in the outside world. The gaslighting, okay? And I want you all to understand what that does to the person who's being gaslit. And I want you to understand where it's, because that term is being misused a lot. So remember, it's not lying. It's when you dismantle the other person, where you absolutely tear the other person apart, where you actually start making a person believe that there's something wrong with them. Remember boundaries. If you find yourself in a relationship, it could be a boss, it could be a colleague, right? So there's quite a few out there. Remember to set boundaries. You cannot set boundaries with a narcissist. You have to set boundaries internally. That's another distinction, right? So this is not that, oh, I have to set a boundary with this person, because you may not be able to, right? If it's a boss, you can't set boundaries with your boss. What you need to do is those internal boundaries. And those internal boundaries are set by techniques like that deep, right? So that don't defend, don't engage, don't personalize. Those things are important to be able to set those boundaries. Remember, you cannot change a narcissist. There's nothing in the world that you're going to be able to do that's going to make them think or act any differently. Obviously, we've talked about the abuse, and more so in the malignant narcissist. And remember the coercive control. That happens a lot with malignant narcissists. We've talked about the cycles of the love bombing and the devaluation. Again, for those of you who want, I know we'll have a question answer session. I'm also going to leave you with my emails for those of you because this is such a big topic to be able to condense it in the 50 minutes. So I know most of you will have questions, and please feel free to write to me. I will always reply to your emails. But understanding that cycle is very important for us to be able to guide the people in our lives when we see them being love bombed, right? So for us to understand and then to be able to protect others and to protect ourselves from getting into relationships like that. And please, if you find yourself in a relationship with a narcissist, seek support. There are therapists who work with and who are trained in. They're not too many, because the training in narcissistic abuse, like the clinician, it's fairly new. But make sure that your therapist, the therapist that you pick, has some understanding of narcissism, especially if you're getting into couples therapy. Do not, and I really want to emphasize this, do not get into couples therapy if you suspect your partner has narcissism or NPD. Please choose a couples therapist that knows about narcissism, because otherwise they may end up blaming the victim. So be wary of that, and understand that leaving sometimes is the only choice that you may have in those relationships. Going no contact might be the only way for you to be able to deal with that. And finally, I'm going to leave you with our contact. And so that's the number of Buxani Counseling Care. I know we have the email there, but that's the admin email. You can always reach me, and my email is rachna@buxanicare.com. Please feel free. We did one on borderline personality. I had so many people send me questions, and I answer each one of them. So I'm here to help in whatever way I can. And Susan, we are good for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Buxani. We really appreciate this. I know we were getting a lot of comments and questions in the chat. We actually did get a comment that there probably needs to be a part 2. So,
I was actually telling Sophia and Eileen when we started, I was like, okay, there's just so much. And really there's, talking about the roles that children play in narcissistic families, it's so important because, like I said, we've touched upon narcissism as a romantic relationship, but what if I have a parent who's narcissistic? How do I deal with that? How do I understand the nuances? Because it's so traumatic for children growing up in those environments. But yes, maybe part 2. We cover that.
Maybe. So we're going to ask everyone, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. I'm going to start. I have a question. I was very interested to hear you say that this is now becoming, the diagnosis of it is becoming part of a spectrum of personality disorders. I have had people in my life that had personality disorders, and I was never really kind of clear that is different. I get that that's different from I don't actually know the other thing to call from a serious mental illness, but can you tell us just a little bit of like what that spectrum would include, what that involves?
So instead of, so first we moved away from the cluster C, right? So the borderline, the NPD, the antisocial. And now we're trying to move to just calling it personality disorder. So we're not going to label a person as borderline versus narcissism. And I'll tell you why. The reason that these disorders were clustered together was because there's a lot of similarities. So the vulnerable narcissist looks much like a person with borderline, right? So because of that, we're trying to get away with the labels. And like I said, maybe it's a good thing because maybe it will bring more people in because there's such a negative connotation attached to these disorders. But it's because of the similarities of these disorders that we're trying to do it as the field is trying to do it as a continuum where you go from mild, moderate, severe, right? So that's how they're trying to do it.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think that's going to really make some impact on how this is dealt with.
Absolutely.
So we have a lot of questions. I'm going to go through them in order. So we'll see how many we can get to. And just so everyone knows, we do have your questions and your name and contact information. So if we don't get to it live right now, we will be able to get back to you with answers. The first question, how would you heal from a narcissist mother? It seems impossible to, and I'm now changed into a people pleaser.
Right. And that's why we need to have a part 2. But yes, children with narcissistic parents are put into or they adopt certain roles growing up, right? And the way to heal is to have, to do some sort of trauma therapy. So it could be, and my personal favorite is IFS, only because I feel it's one of the most compassionately complete techniques. But I know things like EMDR are very effective, but it's really trauma. Growing up in an environment where you are dismissed, where you're invalidated, where to be able to gain my parents' love, I have to be doing stuff, which is why I become that people pleaser, right? So, and then that carries on to all my relationships as I grow older, because that's the only way I know that I'm going to be loved. So it's really going back and healing those parts that were hurt or that were wounded as a child, and that then adopted the people pleasing as a means of survival. So again, I would encourage some sort of trauma therapy to be able to
Right.
start.
So
And let me
reach out
also
to a trained
say,
therapist.
right, with a trained therapist. And can I just also say that it's a lifelong journey, especially when you come from a narcissistic, abusive upbringing. It's a lifelong journey. Award yourself grace and compassion as you go through this journey, because it's not easy and it's not a journey you chose to be on. Right. So, but yes, with the help of a trained therapist, a therapist that's either trained in EMDR or IFS would be fantastic.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have another question, and I'm gonna I think as you mentioned, there's been narcissism has become very high profile in the past, I don't know, 8 years or so. And so to me, everyone now is diagnosing everyone else as a narcissist. So one person did comment that, is there a clearer case than our current president? So we don't want to get into political discussions, but I think it is important because I hear it so much. As lay people, I don't really think that we want to be diagnosing other people as narcissists or anything else. But could you comment on that? Like, if we feel that maybe we're involved in a relationship with someone that has NTD, then again, would it be reach out to a therapist?
Yeah, you would reach out to therapists, and remember, the person with NPD is not going to a therapist, right? Because
Right.
I do want to address what this person asked, because it is true, and it the reality is that we as as a society, we actually condone a lot of behaviors. We reinforce it because we find a lot of narcissists successful. And because of their grandiose presentation, because they have power and they have money, and and those are the kind of things that we as a society reinforce, and it becomes extremely difficult then for people to say, okay, but then what's wrong with that, right? Because they're successful. But no, that's not the way to be, because obviously we're hurting a lot of people because of the inability of the narcissist to actually self-reflect and say, okay, how are my actions actually hurting others? They're not able to do that. But also, ultimately, you have to understand that a narcissist, the reason that they have these grandiose presentations, or they want that attention constantly, or is because they're very insecure, right? So there's a deep rooted sense of emptiness and a sense of insecurity that never gets filled, and that's why they keep doing these things, and they keep needing that attention, and in fact they get really angry when they don't get that attention. But if you do find yourself asking, or after this talk saying, could my boss be narcissistic? Listen, get to a therapist, and they will be able to, but again, a therapist who's trained in has an understanding of narcissism. Remember, when we go to graduate school, we have one chapter in personality, and that's about it, right? So it has to be someone who's gone through that additional training to really understand personality disorders and narcissism in particular, because they are extremely challenging. That's why a lot of therapists actually shy away from the cluster B. Again, we've moved away from the clusters, but a lot of therapists get worried about taking on people with borderline and the vulnerable narcissists, because they're challenging to deal with. So somebody who's trained in it will be able to guide you in terms of not only identifying that, yes, this is what's going on, but then also give you techniques. Because if it is a narcissistic boss and you are not able to get away from that situation, then, giving you techniques of how to cope with it. Did I answer the question, Susan?
Yes, I think you absolutely did. I'm reading through these comments and I see, so let me ask this, because a lot of the comments are coming from people who have had narcissists in their lives and they're trying to heal. And so those people have really been through trauma. That's what you told us earlier. So those are people who have lived through trauma. So the result of trauma is also a mental health condition.
Correct.
So
Correct.
you are now a person who is living with a mental health condition because you have experienced trauma through this situation. And so I think just, speaking to you to our audience on behalf of NAMI, there are a lot of things that you can do. That self-care is very important. Perhaps joining one of our support
And I was
groups.
actually going to suggest, Susan, maybe we need to start a support group, and I would love to run it for victims of narcissistic abuse. I would absolutely love to run that group for NAMI, because the latest research is 25% of people out there have narcissism. So imagine, that number of people, but the number of lives that are being affected by each one of those people. We have a lot of people out there who are struggling. So yes, I would be happy if, but yes, reaching out for support, being able to, knowing that you're not alone. And so using the resources that NAMI offers, talking to people who can be supportive is really, really important, because yes, it is trauma, and trauma is a mental illness.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I think we're going to have to go. But one of the things I think we need to understand is for these personality disorders, including the narcissism, is there a cause for those? Are these people who as children went through their own trauma, or is there research on that?
So there is, right? And so we and there are a couple of ways that this happens, right? And so we've seen people who've become, who are narcissists, but who've come from overindulgent parents, right? So that's one way. The other, but we've also seen kids who maybe have had very dismissive upbringings, dismissive attachments, also grow up sometimes to be narcissistic, right? But if you take genes, environment, temperament, put it in a blender, mix it up, that's how you get narcissism. So it has to be, so temperamentally, this person is difficult. Maybe you've got other people in the family that have narcissism, and then it's that invalidating environment, or maybe a super indulgent environment, and put it all together, mix it up, and that's how we get narcissists.
Interesting. This is really fascinating, and I think
I'm telling you, Susan, and we've touched the tip of this,
right.
because, again, because of our timing. But yeah, I'm happy to come back. This is really a topic that's close to my heart, because it's affecting way too many people. And I feel a lot of it is because of that lack of awareness. We don't talk about it much, other than the TikToks, but then that's not the place we should be getting information from. So
right.
Because there's a lot of misinformation there. So I feel like we need to build that awareness, educate people, and support people who are going through these challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we want to say thank you to everyone. We will follow up. There are so many comments and questions in the chat that we are going to have to follow up in some way, have a part 2 or do a series. I'm not sure what we're going to do, but we will.
So I did a podcast and we had 4. I'm just saying.
Okay. Okay. And
that's
those
how long it took.
Are there access to those podcasts?
Yes, it was actually Nikki Spo. So Nikki Spo did, I did like a series of 4 podcasts with her. And the last one was actually taking in questions from her listeners, and me answering it. But it was more in depth because we dealt with again the parenting aspect of it. So when you come from a narcissistic abuse family. So yes, but we did a fantastic 4 series episode podcasts.
Okay, so I'm sorry again, the chat is going crazy. So yes, you will have access to the slides. This video will be on our YouTube channel. So okay, Sophia just posted a link to that. The podcast that you were talking about,
Yes, it's
you have that, Sophia?
Nikki's
Okay.
School. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go. It was lovely.
Oh,
And,
there it is. Okay, so that's in the chat. And then Sophia, can you post the link to our YouTube channel in the chat? And then just one more time, we want to remind everyone of our walk on May 10th. If you want to find a place where hopefully everyone that's on this call will be at the walk, and
yes,
you will then
and I'll be there. If you want to meet me in person and ask me questions, come. And I have a booth there. Please come and talk to me.
Yes, that's perfect. That's perfect. And all the other people who are on this call, and you can talk to each other and build that network of people who are living with this, who have survived it. So, because that's what NAMI does, we bring people together. So thank you, everyone. There are multiple ways to contact all of us. NAMImiami.org is our website. You can always go right there. My name is Susan Holtzman. Thank you to Sophia. Thank you to Eileen Pestana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank
too.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.